on the current issues in international security, and we have a number of current issues in international security. Most of them we do discuss in Russian. Today we do discuss them in English. We have here in the room mostly students of the MA GIMO Peer Center joint program on international security, and it's part of the curriculum of the group. We also have some invited colleagues, students and professors from GIMO. And we also have a hybrid format today of this seminar. So we do have some participants online. Before I say a few opening comments and pass the floor to the moderator, to Alexander Gromov, I would like to remind our online speakers, and Alexander would help me probably in the chat, to remind that the rules of the House here are as follows. You should be with your camera on and with your name and last name either in Cyrillic and Russian or in English on. If you are not on, and if you are not part of the Russian government who informed us in advance that they do participate, you must have your camera turned on, otherwise you would be turned off in a few minutes from now and would not be allowed to come back again. So this should be as clear as this. I still do not see some of the online participants following my instructions. Please do so. Please turn on your cameras. I thank you. I see some of the participants who are not good. Yeah, that's better, and this would also save us time not to turn you off. Of course, if you turn off the camera for a minute or two, this is not a drama, but we will not turn you off. But please, most time keep your camera on. Now, just as a reminder to all of us, all the group, but mostly to the other participants and students other than MA group on international security, that we have been working throughout all this year on a series of various issues, on urgent issues on international security, and that's the variety of issues. We went to issue of nuclear testing, we went to issue of Russian-American relations, we went to looked into the issue of preparing for the NPT review conference. We also looked at those such issues as AI and its security and military applications. We looked into different regions. It was Mongolia, Russia-Mongolia strategic relationship. It was Sahel region. So it's both hard security, development-related issues, and security, and more. And we are very grateful to our external speakers, both experienced and young, who have shared their views and knowledge to our group. And this is not the first time during this fall semester when we turn to the issue of Iran. We already had earlier this fall in September, and the weather was more cooperative here in Moscow. We looked into the issue of the consequences of the Israeli and US bombings, attacks on the Iranian nuclear infrastructure, what it means for the region. And it was Dr. Tsukanov who addressed the group. Today, we turn into a slightly different angle of the Iran issue, but clear enough, this is one of the most important topics which is on our radar here in Moscow, as well as on the radar on both players in the region and players globally. I just came to this session from the meeting where I had to discuss, not the same as what Linus would address us, but basically had to discuss the approaches towards the Iranian nuclear program, the role of IAEA, the role of EU, the role of pressure, and we had very interesting interactions with the Egyptian ambassador who just came to Moscow. It was much more difficult interactions with our European colleagues who do, I have no intention to disclose the conversation, but clearly they do see the more pressure on Iran, the better. And once when the pressure is high enough, Iran cracks and will allow either to shut down its nuclear program or to allow full transparency. Some claimed that Iran is in non-compliance with the NPT. I repeat, in non-compliance with the NPT. So this subject is ongoing, important, and I think we would not find today a solution, even with the brilliant work which Linus has made in the format of his report published earlier by Peer Center and in the format of his MA thesis, which he had defended here at MGIMO with the A grade. With that, I pass the floor to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Welcome to the expert seminar dedicated to one of the most dynamic and complex issues of international security, the situation around Iran's nuclear program. For decades, the issue of Iran's nuclear program has attracted the attention of the expert community and political leaders of many countries around the world. Today, it is de facto a web of contradictions, intervening historical ambitions, and confrontation issues of national sovereignty, energy independence, global security, and non-proliferation. All of these issues, in combinations with other, continue to keep the international community in tension. The Iranian nuclear program began in the middle of the last century, when Iran was actively cooperating with the West. But since then, the issue has come long and difficult way. The end of spring 2025 brought a series of news regarding the Iranian case. On the one hand, there was the United States, which during negotiations mediated by Oman relied on diplomacy backed by a tough ultimatum: stop to enrich uranium in Iran. On the other hand, the strict Iran's rejection and speech of Iran's foreign minister, who said at the end of May this year that he can say quite clearly that there will be no agreement if they want to take away our people's right to use peaceful atomic energy. As well as the summer of 2025 was extremely eventful. The crisis surrounding Iran's nuclear program reached a new critical point. The actual start was given by the International Atomic Energy Agency resolution adopted on June 12, 2025. In June, Israel and the US launched a series of missile and bomb strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, including Natanz and Fordow. This unprecedented military intervention was a direct implication of a diplomatic deadlock, 5 rounds of US-Iranian negotiations that failed to overcome a key contradiction: Washington's demand for a complete stop to uranium enrichment and the Iranian government's direct refusal to do so. So today we have a meeting to analyze this complex web of contradictions. We will attempt to answer a number of key questions. How did various forms of international pressure, diplomatic, economic, military influence, Tehran's decisions at different historical stages? Why did some international initiatives achieve only temporary results, while others led to counterproductive consequences? What are the possible scenarios for the development of the situation after the recent military escalation and the chaos of IAEA inspections? I hope that today's seminar will provide a deeper understanding of the situation and an opportunity to reflect and discuss this topical issue. Thank you for your attention. And now I give the floor to the speaker. Please welcome Linus Höller, a researcher on non-proliferation issues.
Thank you. It's good to be back in Moscow, if only virtually, just like the first time around. I have a couple slides prepared. I think once I start the presentation, I will not be able to see anyone. So if there is anything urgent, just interrupt me. I will be able to hear you. I don't think I will be able to see you. Let me try to share my screen. Give me 1 second. And let me know if you can see this fine.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. All right, so as you have seen in the reading list and in the announcements, what we're talking about is basically a historical cross-section of the entire Iranian nuclear program from its inception up until pretty much the current day. The title already gives you sort of an idea of what I was investigating in this research, which was, is the Iranian program, has it sort of been on a set trajectory independent of international actions and international pressures, or has there been sort of more of an interaction with the global community than might be initially assumed by some observers? Here's the agenda, and I won't go through this in terms of reading it, but there's really a couple of key things that I want to do. For one, of course, I want to convince everyone who's listening that I am the top authority on Iran, and that my research is absolutely and unquestionably correct. A second thing, of course, is that I want to go into a bit of the detail of how the research was actually conducted. I think this might be quite helpful, especially considering a lot of the audience is students who also have master's theses that they have to write, that they have to research, and then that they have to defend. So I'm going to spend some time on that. And finally, I also want to touch a little bit on the policy relevance of the work at hand and see how that ultimately pans out based on what we find. You've had my biography, I think. Here's a little bit of a summary again. So I hold a master's from MGIMO, which is why I'm very well prepared to be here today in international relations, back when it was still a dual degree program with the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in California, where I got another MA in non-proliferation and terrorism studies, so very topical.
Sorry, Linus, sorry.
Yes.
Did you switch the slide?
Yes, can you not see any slide
no, we
change?
see the title.
Let me try again. Sorry about that. It might work if I don't full screen it. Let's give it another go.
Maybe.
Oops. How about this? Can you
Yes.
see the
No,
slide?
now-
And now can you see the other slide?
Yes, now we are able to see.
Okay, then let's leave it
Thank
like
you.
this. I think that'll be best. So those two masters obviously prepared me for this. I also have an undergraduate from Northwestern University in the US. I am not American, despite what I might sound like. I am actually from Austria and based in Berlin. I wear a couple different hats. So I am primarily a journalist nowadays. I work as a Europe correspondent and open source investigator for Defense News, which is an industry publication based in the US, but with a global audience. I also work in an advisory capacity for the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. And I have done previous work on non-proliferation topics, including at the OPCW full-time earlier this year, as well as the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies in the US, which I think it's not controversial to say is the US sister organization of Peer Center and the VCDNP, the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation in Vienna. That's enough about me. Let's get into actual subject matter. I was asked to sort of do a quick refresher on some of the technical stuff of relating to nuclear weapons production before we dive into the Iran stuff, because I think it might actually be quite useful for the comprehension of some of the later topics. There's two diagrams here that I won't go into that much detail for. Really, what you need to know is that when it comes to nuclear fuel and nuclear fuel for weapons, as well as for civilian reactors, there is something called the nuclear fuel cycle, which is the diagram on the right. It's an imperfect cycle, I would say, because things exit the cycle and things enter the cycle. But really, it goes from extracting the uranium or the uranium rocks from the ground to processing it into a powder. Then you convert it into your. Yes.
Sorry, are you demonstrating? Now, yeah, now, thank you. Sorry.
Can you see the slides or?
Yes, now I see.
Okay. Yes, so into processing it into powder, converting it into uranium hexafluoride, which is basically a powder as well that you can turn into gas quite easily. Then what really is important to our topic at hand here is the enrichment. There's different ways of enriching without getting into that much detail. The most important one for our topic and generally globally is gaseous diffusion, which is a fancy way of saying you put gas in a cylinder and spin it really fast. By spinning it really fast, you separate the two different types of uranium that you can use for further processes, such as for reactor fuel, or if you have more nefarious purposes, for nuclear weapons. The key difference between those two isn't actually the material so much as the enrichment grade. So for nuclear weapons, you want to do this enrichment a lot longer than you need to do it for reactor fuel and get it to a much higher level. Reactor fuel usually takes uranium that's enriched to about 3.5% of a specific isotope, whereas nuclear weapons, the exact number varies, but the typically cited one is that you'll want to have it around 90% enrichment. Another thing to consider here is that the farther along you go, the more of the work you've already done, of course. So if you have 60% enriched uranium, you need a lot less work to get it to 90% than you would have needed to get it to 60% in the first place. I hope that is more or less clear. That was a very, very quick crash course. I will pause here for a second in case this wasn't clear. I don't hear any cries for help. Okay, then I will continue. So for the actual research at hand, my central question was, how have international actions influenced the trajectory of the Iranian nuclear program from the 1950s to the present? That is a very broad scope, which means that it had to be broken down into a couple of key objectives. The first one being to examine 5 distinct periods of Iran's nuclear development. What those are, I will get into in just a second. Yes?
Sorry, we have problems with connection. Can you switch the slides, please?
The slide is on the research question slide. Can you not see this one?
I
Let me
think
try
it's
again.
a serious slide. Mm,
On my side, when I open it in Yandex, it shows the research questions slide. That is strange.
mm.
Let me retry sharing my
You
screen.
please
I'm very
restart
sorry
it.
for these technical difficulties. I take it my narration isn't enough to follow the subject matter. Let's try again. I will share my entire screen this time, so you'll see a weird artifact for a second. Okay, how is this?
Looks better, but we don't see presentation.
Oh, I don't know how to address that. Do you have it on your end? I sent the file earlier. Maybe we can do that instead of messing around with this for ages.
Now we are able to see the presentation.
Research question.
Okay.
Yes.
If you can see it, then that's great. I think it's the Iranians trying to stop my presentation.
I hope
Objectives.
it will work.
One being examining the 5 periods of nuclear development. What those are, we'll get into in just a second. Within these 5 periods, I then identified specific, what I called hinge points, sort of inflection points, where international pressure or potentially direct impact on Iranian decisions in the nuclear realm. And this ultimately, of course, with all the larger aim of developing then a framework for understanding the international influence on the Iranian nuclear program and potential transferable observations for other cases of potential nuclear proliferators. I will now change the slide, so if you can't see a new slide, let me know.
Did you switch it?
Are we able to see the new slide?
No.
No.
Awesome. Yay. Okay. So a couple key takeaways before we get into the actual details. So the key takeaways were that, in fact, different types of international pressure have different effects on the trajectory and the pace of the Iranian nuclear program. Intuitively, that might not seem that surprising, but there has not previously been sort of comprehensive research to prove this across different types of pressure. The second one, which is also policy relevant, is that coordinated international action was vastly more effective than unilateral threats, even by any of the most powerful countries. And finally, there was a pattern that emerged of initial defiance followed by subsequent accommodation and or compromise. And we will see all 3 of these things as we go into the details for the specific time periods.
Linus,
yes.
I think I can demonstrate the presentation from our side. Just tell me when I need to switch slides.
Okay, let's do that. I think that will solve some of the tech issues. So we're currently on slide number 6.
Number 6.
One more. There we go. That's where we were just now. So this is what we just went over. Now, if we could go to the next slide, and then we'll get started with that. Yes. So some of the gaps in the existing literature. Why was this research even necessary in the first place? This is a very important thing, as you all know, to highlight in your master's thesis. Why is it even worth reading all those hundreds of pages that you may have written? The current literature on Iran before this work really focused on the history of the Iranian program without necessarily an analysis of, or a focus on the analysis of the international dimension. So there were some timelines, there were reports of the entire rundown. There were theoretical explanations for Iran's motivations, like sort of the broader work on why states go nuclear and why states don't go nuclear. There was some analysis on containment efforts, and there was a lot of work done on the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal that was arrived to in the mid-2010s. However, what was missing and what this work seeks to fill is this systematic longitudinal analysis of how these different types of international pressure specifically influence nuclear decision-making over time. If we go to the next slide. There was 5 types of international pressure that I identified for my work. These should be numbered 1 to 5. I don't know why they're all number 1, maybe because they're all equally important. These were identified based on the historical readings and also in conversation with some experts who had done a lot of work on Iran. The types included diplomatic condemnation. So this includes, for example, UN resolutions, public rebukes, diplomatic pressure by other states. Another type, which is very central to some of the more recent developments, is economic sanctions. So this is trade restrictions, asset freezes, things like that. The third type is the military threat, or the threat of the use of force, or even the use of force. So this is the use of military strikes and of force posturing, so moving assets to the region, moving a US aircraft carrier, for example, near the coast. There's normative pressure. So this is the global norms against the use of nuclear weapons. This comes from civil society. This comes from moral imperatives. This comes from religion as well. And then another form of pressure is covert technical operations, also known as spycraft. This was the hardest to research for obvious reasons, because a lot of that is very hard to attribute or has not been openly reported. This, of course, includes sabotage and also cyber attacks. In the Iranian context, a very important one is the Stuxnet attack against the Iranian centrifuges, where a virus was infiltrated into the Iranian computer systems to degrade the centrifuges faster. The Iranian responses then were seen as either being acceleratory or deceleratory, meaning either they sped up their nuclear development or they slowed down the nuclear development. Speaking with Kelsey Davenport, who has done a lot of research on this, we also identified a pattern of initial escalation and then compromise. So a lot of times when Iran was pressed, they would initially act defiant. They would say, never ever will we concede on this or that point. And then ultimately, a couple of weeks, a couple of months later, maybe half a year, maybe even longer, they would quietly come to the negotiating table or quietly make a diplomatic overture that displayed a certain willingness to deal. There's also an analytical innovation of disaggregating international pressure, building on these 2 authors that I have listed here in the bottom and that I highly recommend you read. If we could go to the next slide. I think this is pretty much a repeat of what we have already said. I used a lot of different sources to try to establish a good causality. The sentence in the top, which is very wordy and very professional sounding, sort of summarizes that. I try to use a wide variety of languages so that I'm not too biased only on English sources. And I used additional empirical data, such as economic data, levels of enrichment, et cetera, but you know this from the actual work. Next slide, please. So here are the 5 historical periods and the hinge points that I identified. So the Iranian nuclear program got started under a previous political system in Iran under the Shah, as you know. Around the year 1959 is when I start that time period, the hinge point here being the Non-Proliferation Treaty accession, and the defining form of international pressure being normative. Why this is, we'll get to on the next slide. The other periods that I identified were the post, not quite yet.
Sure.
The post-war resurgence after the Iran-Iraq war, the period of clandestine weaponization around the turn of the millennium, finally then the negotiations and the JCPOA, and now also the post-JCPOA world. And you see in this table the rough time frame for all of these, and then the hinge point that I identified, as well as the defining form of international pressure in that time period. Now we can go to the next slide. So for the Shah era, this is when the Iranian nuclear program got its start. It actually got its start in close collaboration with the United States. A lot of the equipment that the Shah imported for his nuclear program was US supplied, US made, and under deals with the United States. There was also at the time a certain desire to at least keep the option open to develop nuclear weapons. This is documented in diplomatic cables of the time and also in newspaper reporting at the time, that the Shah himself was aware of the weapons potential, of course, of this technology and was actively wanting to keep this path open for his country. There does not seem to have been a decision to develop nuclear weapons as such. And this is something that also carries forward for many years. But the government at the time did want the option to persist. The main idea, however, at the time under the Shah seems to have been to make the country a progressive, worldly, open, at least economically, country to the world. And developing nuclear energy was seen as the way forward in that regard. It was prestigious, it was very flashy, very cool. It was what all the important countries were doing at the time, so Iran wanted it as well. This desire for international prestige and legitimacy, however, also is what exposed the country to the normative pressures of this time. So this is the era when the norm against nuclear weapons really started taking off. This is the era when the Non-Proliferation Treaty came into existence. And this desire for international prestige and legitimacy, which was playing hand in hand with the international norms of the time, helps explain, I think, why Iran was one of the first signatories of the Non-Proliferation Treaty when it opened, despite at the same time having this interest in keeping the option open for nuclear weapons development. Then there's sort of a historic break, of course, in Iran when the Iranian Revolution comes around and they overthrow the Shah. It is no longer a monarchy. It is no longer Western aligned necessarily. Instead, they now have a theocracy with a very different political system. And one of the first things that comes out of this political system is a very skeptical attitude toward everything that the Shah had started and all the projects that existed under the Shah. One of these, of course, one of the big prestige projects was the nuclear program. So it was actually effectively put on hold for a good number of years. Most of the scientists had either left when the revolution came around or were dismissed. There was restructuring in the government. The nuclear program was not a priority at all. And there were significant voices in the government that wanted it gone. This changed when Iran and Iraq entered a very devastating war. The countries were at war for almost a decade for effectively very little territorial change along the front line. What did happen in this war, however, which is quite relevant to our story, is that chemical weapons were used on a large scale. And this happened also, and one might even say primarily, against Iranian targets by Iraqi military units. Another addition to this dimension, not only the use of weapons of mass destruction against Iran, but also the then following almost complete silence by the international community in reaction to these atrocities. The international community was very slow to react. They were a lot of the Western countries that had previously worked on Iran's nuclear program were implicated in the chemical weapons used by supplying materials to Iraq that were then used in the chemical weapons. Yes.
Sorry, you have 5 minutes. According to this.
Okay, I will speed up then. This led to sort of a feeling of strategic isolation, strategic loneliness in Iran, which is crucial to understanding the further trajectory. And that led to the restarting of the nuclear weapons program, or of the nuclear program without the weapons, the nuclear program under the new rulers with, again, the potential eye to weaponization. If we go to the next slide. So I found this really nice map in a CIA report showing the areas where chemical weapons were used. Those are the darker areas on the map. The lighter shaded areas are the areas where there was significant ground warfare. So you see how much of the front line was affected by this chemical weapons use. And there were, of course, major population centers in these areas as well. which just shows you how ingrained the trauma, of course, was for the generation that lived through this and for the leadership of the country. Next slide, please. So the later periods, the key one here is the clandestine phase, 1995 to around 2005, when there was the so-called Ahmad Plan. This is still very murky. Different sources will say different things, but what we can be more or less sure of is that there was some form of dimension of non-peaceful use to the Iranian nuclear program. There were experiments that are very hard to explain, if not for the development of nuclear weapons, or at least to keep the option open. This was ultimately brought to light by a covert operation, effectively by a dissident group that revealed this to the world, and that resulted in very intense diplomatic pressure and ultimately forced negotiations. There was heavy diplomatic activity in this time frame as well. However, there was very limited success of this diplomatic activity in this time period itself. If we look at the next time period, this is the era of intense negotiations and ultimately the JCPOA. However, there was a crucial dimension to this that didn't yet exist in the previous one that ultimately contributed to having this success, which was the fact that there were now widespread global economic measures against Iran. And the fact that these weren't just imposed by, say, the EU or by the United States, but were UN backed, they were globally binding. There was really a broad coalition to put pressure, while at the same time offering, a relief for that pressure by having the possibility of arriving at a deal. This was evidenced by participant interviews, various literature. This is well studied, so I will not dive too deeply into this. Finally, the final time period here, which is the one we're currently at, although you could make an argument we've reached a new inflection point earlier this year, is the post-JCPOA era, with Trump withdrawing the US from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action and instead opting to use US military and diplomatic and economic leverage to really put a lot of pressure on Iran. However, doing so basically unilaterally. This is the re-emergence of the military dimension and also shows the limits of going it alone effectively, of doing all of these actions without having strong partners. If we go to the next slide. So we have a couple of graphs here. I won't dwell too long on them. Effectively, they show you the effect of the joint global pressure campaign in the mid-2000s to mid-2010s. The left graph shows you the GDP growth per year, which you can see on average was significantly lower than and then massively rebounded when the JCPOA came around. And I like the graph on the right particularly much. This is the crude oil, daily crude oil production in Iran and Iraq. Iraq is the dotted line and Iran is the continuous line. And there you can see that even though they are in the same region, had a lot of the same surrounding factors, they had very divergent paths after the revelation of the Iranian nuclear program. And then you can see a little bump for a couple of years during the JCPOA. Next slide, please. This is the same graph in different colors, effectively. I can send the presentation later for you to look yourself. Next slide, please. So a couple of main conclusions. International actions do, in fact, deeply influence Iranian nuclear decisions. Who would have thought? But not all international pressure is deceleratory. This is really the key takeaway here. Different pressure types work at different times, and no single approach is always effective. Economic sanctions right now may not be as effective as they may have been in the 2010s. Normative pressure was extremely effective early on due to the quest for legitimacy. The current Iranian government is not so much concerned with that dimension, at least not as the Shah was. Economic sanctions were effective, but would not have on their own resulted in a change of the nuclear trajectory if it weren't for diplomatic engagement and good faith diplomatic engagement. The military pressure fundamentally altered the security calculations and in fact proved acceleratory. This is of course referring to the Iran-Iraq war, where there was the explicit use of military force and the threat to the Iranian lands by military force. And covert operations have forced transparency and informed the international community, but also increased defiance in Iran. And I think we have seen this also more recently again. Of course, the nuclear program continues onward and develops in different ways still, but I'm sure we will discuss this in just a second, because this is mostly looking at the historical trajectory. Next slide, please. Just as a brief sort of service to the viewer, this is beyond the scope of my research, but here are some of the latest developments that I'm sure we will be extensively discussing in the next couple of minutes. There were, of course, the military strikes. So there's different estimates on how far the program was set back. There is also, I would argue, a risk of knock-on effects in the coming years, in the coming decades, beyond just Iran. Potentially other countries that are on the threshold deciding to go deeper into the underground with the development, literally and metaphorically, with the development of nuclear weapons. In August 2025, the snapback mechanism was activated, the reintroduction, in theory, of comprehensive sanctions against Iran. There was then a brief moment of light in September 2025 when it looked like Iran had reached an agreement with the IEA. That very quickly collapsed. In November, there have been a couple of new pieces of information that came out, including one report that Iranian nuclear scientists had visited a couple of Russian companies involved in similar spheres at least twice, that have raised some eyebrows. A couple of things about the current status. Iran still has a very large stockpile of high enriched uranium. So this is roughly 60% enriched. If we remember from one of the very first slides, if you're at 60%, it is much easier to get to 90% than it is to get to 60% in the first place. So this puts them in a position where what is called their breakout time, the time until they could conceivably develop a nuclear weapon, is much reduced. And the stockpile that they have is very large. Iran has temporarily suspended all its enrichment. This is probably due to strikes. At least they have suspended if we take them at their word. They have also, however, said that they will resume enrichment, and that they will do so with upgraded capacity by upgrading the centrifuges and so on. Internationally, there's, of course, repercussions with the IEA having basically no insight into the current developments and the threats of the withdrawal from the NPT. If we go to the next slide.
Sorry, Linus, I have
Yes, I will cut it short. I just wanted to bring the slide up onto the screen. I think this covers most of the research, so I will now yield the floor back, and I will be very keen to hear the discussion that we have coming up.
Linus, thank you for your speech. So now we can give the floor to the expert, the head of the Department of International Problems and the leading researcher at the MGIMO Institute of International Relations, Igor Alexandrovich Istobin.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to participate in this seminar and to be able to listen to this, I think, very important piece of research. I also had a chance to look into the report published by Peer Center, so I think it is very timely and it is very deep research, which goes into historical detail and combines important different types of sources to bring to light some of the things that difficult to disclose in any other way. When I was listening to this really brilliant presentation, I had just a couple of points in mind, and I think that we have to take into account when we talk about the Iranian nuclear issue. The presentation itself, I think, is very symptomatic of much of the debate that we have on the Iranian nuclear issue, on the possibility how we could avoid weaponization of this program in Iran. And it is to a significant extent, in case of Iran, in case of other issues of non-proliferation, is focused on potential pressures that could be put on the players so that they are not develop nuclear weapons. And I think that this could be somehow one-sided approach if we look so much on the coercive side, and we underestimate the importance of the positive incentives and the effects of the positive incentives on the behavior of the international actors. And I think the report says it has very good evidence of that when it says that the trigger point for the renewed Iranian nuclear ambitions to a significant degree was the Iran-Iraq war, sense of insecurity, sense that all states, Western states, they don't like to talk about that right now, but they were on Saddam Hussein's side in this war to a significant degree. And so this idea of the strategic lawlessness really affected the Iranian nuclear leadership at that point in time. And it seems that there could be some parallels with the situation that Iran finds it today. So again, even if we talk about other types of pressure that seem to be more conducive, we, I think, have to take this with a grain of salt. And of course, when we talk about the JCPOA and its success, to a significant degree, it is somehow linked to the two types of incentives that appeared before 2013, when actually the negotiations restarted. The first type of incentive were the international sanctions that were introduced by the United Nations. And the second type of incentives were the restrictions imposed by the European Union and the United States at that point in time. And so very often much of the success is attributed to these two factors. But if you look at the results of the JCPOA, the results of negotiations, we'll see, and we put it into historical perspective, I think it's very interesting to see that they actually, the JCPOA, let's say, the concessions pursued by Iran, they were not necessarily, enormous. Let me say, perhaps they were significant, but they were not enormous. And it certainly was not a one-sided defeat for Iran, the results of these negotiations, because actually the amount of activity in the nuclear field that were allowed on the JCPOA was much higher than what Iran was eager to accept, even under Ahmadinejad in previous iterations of these negotiations. And of course, this was significantly due to the fact that the Iranian nuclear program developed in this decade. But this, I think, also has to put us into a certain perspective that we shouldn't overestimate the negotiation power that are acquired with different types of sanctions or different types of pressures. Finally, one final point that I think that we have to take into account is a broader point, because this discussion, as many discussions by experts, when it deals with the issue of Iran, deals with the issue of Iranian nuclear program. But there is a big question to what extent the kind of confrontation or the tensions that we have between Iran and some Western states, the United States, the European states, to what extent it is due specifically because of the nuclear issue and the prospects of weaponization of Iranian nuclear program, or it is about something else, about the political issues. And in this regard, I think we have to take into account that Iran consistently throughout all this period insisted that it doesn't seek nuclear weapons, and that due to the religious reasons, it is prohibited from acquiring nuclear weapons. And on the other hand, of course, in international relations, discussion international relations theory, scholars will tell you that words are cheap. There is cheap talk, right? You could say things, but it doesn't mean that you really act on your words. But even if we compare the situation of the last few months, we witness that even with all the difficulties of the JCPOA, basically in the beginning of this year, the Iranian nuclear activities were under extensive control by IAEA, by International Atomic Energy Agency. And the result of the coercion used against Iran in the last several months led to the situation where we have less, not more, control over Iranian nuclear program. If we take it due to the military strikes, which led to the collapse of previous negotiations.
You can
And if we take,
1 minute.
I'm finishing already. And if we talking about the European decision by Britain, France, and Germany to activate snapback. So with the snapback now in place, the Iran basically ceased its previous cooperation with the IAEA, or it's very hard to find ways how to restore the type of control that we were previously over its nuclear programs. And so finally, one important point also related to this presentation that we had is that the presentation talked about the pressure pushed on Iran by the international community. And I think in the 2000s and early 2010s, that was a very important factor, that there was an international community that could, affect and try to put pressure on Iran and try to negotiate with Iran. Now we don't have international community, frankly speaking. We have, on the one hand, we have Western states and Western community, which pursues one policy and lives in one legal reality. And then there are other parts of the world. Here in Moscow, it's often called the global majority. We could speak about Russia, we could speak about China. Maybe they are not necessarily aligned 100% Russia and China, even on the Iranian case. There are, space for interpretation, but certainly they don't live within the same international community, or to the same degree in the same international community as we had in the early 2010s. And I think this could also affect the dynamic of the situation. And of course, it limits the way how the Iranian nuclear program could be affected from the outside. Thank you.
Thank you. So, dear colleagues, now we have 10 minutes for discussion. Please ask questions. Please, Daria.
Should I speak here? Or...
You should come here.
No. Классика, микрофончик носится на еще половину.
Герман. Could you please help me?
Good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. I know what can I say more after such a precise comment made by Professor Stoneman. However, I'm not a specialist in this sphere. I wonder about economic sanctions and the mechanism itself. So, Iran, for me personally, is interesting comparing to Russia's foreign policy, as your presentation concentrated mostly on the effects and, well, the ways of different types of pressure that was put against Iran. And nowadays we can witness the pretty same mechanism that is used by the Western states and that's implemented. So I wonder about economic sanctions themselves, about well, the ways how it shapes domestic policy in Iran, and whether there is any opportunity how these sanctions can be recalibrated by the West, if they still can be an effective and serve as an effective tool and mechanism, or there is no possibility here that these mechanisms will somehow evolve. Yeah, so we see that Iran responds to the policy changes, and there are another allies. So it's not that dependent as it used to be on the Western countries. So there are another allies, and the trade changes, partners change, countries and well, companies seek another ways how to trade, how to work together. So. The question is mostly about the evolution of sanctions, or is there any chance that aligned with the diplomatic methods, they will somehow influence Iranian policy? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very broad topic and obviously on everyone's minds right now. I think there's a couple key differences between the Iranian case and the Russian case right now. And the main one, I think, that is really the core difference is that the Iranian sanctions were a global UN-led effort. Countries, including those that were friendlier in terms of other diplomatic relations with Iran and those that were very unfriendly with Iran for a very long time, were on the same side in this regard. Those sanctions were implemented globally and universally. And I think the other key thing there is that the sanctions on their own, I mean, it's always hard to prove a counterfactual, but it seems to me that the sanctions on their own wouldn't have gotten very far. The sanctions were only effective, or maybe sanctions in a very broad sense of the term, the economic pressure, was only effective because it was coupled with diplomacy, and because it was coupled with good faith diplomacy that actually sought to arrive at a conclusion rather than just sought to, show that we're doing something without actually entering into negotiations. And diplomacy that was also, again, backed up by a global international consensus on what the intended outcome was and the global backstop to make that happen. I think those are a couple of key differences between those two cases. I'm happy to also yield the floor to others, but I hope that addressed the question.
Thank you. Kirill, please.
Thank you very much, Linus, for delivering us the results of your research. Since you didn't have time to present us your recommendations, I want to raise the following question. What is, to your mind, the plan, the measures or the complex of measures to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, considering two important issues? The first is the situation of this year, of the bombing, Israeli and the US bombing of Iran, and second, prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons while not limiting Iran's peaceful nuclear program as it stated in the NPT treaty. Thank you.
Oh boy. If I had the answer to that question, I think I wouldn't be giving a seminar. I would probably be working in some agency that I can't name. But I will try. I think the key thing for any solution for the Iranian nuclear question is that the security concerns of Iran need to be sufficiently addressed, right? The reason why any country develops nuclear weapons, it's an expensive thing to do. It's a costly thing to do also in terms of, reputation and so on. The reason why any country decides to go down that path is because it has legitimate security concerns. Whether other countries think that those concerns are well-founded is ultimately irrelevant if the leadership of that country has those concerns. And any possible solution for the Iranian nuclear potential military dimension of the nuclear program would need to address that. I think another thing, again, not to sound like a broken record, but is that there needs to be a broad international coalition to make that happen. It can't just be one part of the global community. And I do not think that the global community is completely defunct. I mean, we still have international organizations that are universal. We have international treaties that are universal or near universal that include all the relevant players. We have the IEA as a very solid foundation that gives us an idea of how things can be done and who can oversee it. So I think there's a solid foundation, a solid framework there to build on, but it needs diplomatic engagement, and I think it needs compartmentalization also in the relation between some of the great powers.
Thank you. I'm afraid that we don't have time for discussion anymore. Victor, sorry. So we have to conclude our expert seminar. So as a moderator, first of all, I want to thank everyone for a fruitful discussion, for interesting questions. Thanks to Linus' presentation, we discussed in more detail some individual topics related to some technical, political, and other aspects. Of course, thanks to questions of our students, we were able to see a situation in more details. In conclusion, I would like to say that issue of Iran and its nuclear program, of course, it's one of the actual events of current international security situation. It's always so dangerous when such ancient conflicts as Arab-Israeli or Persian-Israeli conflicts exacerbating with issues of nuclear weapons. Of course, the summer of this year showed us that we are very close to the edge, which can show us the difference between regional or and global nuclear war. Thank God we didn't see it. Of course, speaking about the regional problems, we must understand that these problems which on a first look simple for some experts and over complex for others, in fact, influence in the whole world today, influence on the whole world today, and how important to detect the reaction of both sides, Israel and Iran, and of course to take into account the factor of interests of European states, of the United States, which since the early 19th actively provides their politics in Middle East and Asian regions. So I would like to give thanks to the audience. Thank you for your comments, questions. Thank you.
Let us thank our moderator and our speaker. Again, moderator for his summary and the speaker for presenting in a very concise way his work and his findings, which actually altogether were around 200-page MA dissertation. And as we already discussed in another case, it was awarded a high mark here by the Commission, and just based on his findings, Linus wrote the report for Peer Center, which is more concise, but still it's around 100 pages. So today we could get both the summary of the findings by Linus Heller, but also to see him and to hear his voice, which is always very good, rather than just to have the text, and of course a very useful presentation of today. As always, I always say that this format allows us for good introduction into the topic, but not always allows us for an in-depth discussion. But it was very helpful to have Professor Istomin with his comments. Actually, I share his conclusions, which also would help me make my conclusions shorter, and also applaud to his effort already for a few years to have his class on art of negotiations, actually using JCPOA as an example. And this is my point here. JCPOA was not something which came to all of us easy. That was extremely hard work of various players, all those who were within the JCPOA finally, and those who were behind the scenes, including the Arabs, the Israelis. Some wanted to put some obstacles to the process, others wanted the process to conclude, but with a certain shift. But it was an effort of multilateral diplomacy, including my country, Russia, including the United States, China, and others, and Iran itself, which is very important, to have a balanced agreement. Again, that agreement was achieved already in the times of a huge disbalance of international system. It was already after the reunification of Crimea with Russia, when our relations with the United States were really on the very low. But still, when some wanted to achieve, he or she achieves. And this is also true about international relations. There was a political will, there was a need, and there was a compromise on each side. So lessons learned from the JCPOA should be with us all the times, because we don't have many other examples. In fact, we do not have other examples of such multilateral diplomacy which produced fruits in our times when nuclear issues were concerned. At the same time, another lesson of JCPOA is very painful, that one state who was part of the JCPOA, who was a leading power towards the JCPOA at some point, withdrew from JCPOA. And this is not Iran. And this is an important reminder, because sometimes the current discourse goes like it was Iran who was guilty, 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 guilty. No, it was the United States. It was the same guy, Donald Trump, who, God bless him. But that was him who withdrew from the JCPOA and basically destroyed that balance. And all what we had later on, including bombings by Israel, those US demonstrations of force, whatever it was, with result or with more, with the show, remains to be seen. That were the consequences. But I think that Trump 2 may be very different from Trump 1. Administration is different, composition of people there is different. So we not necessarily should apply the logic of Trump 1 to Trump 2, but we cannot ignore those facts. We cannot ignore the fact that the only country in the Middle East with nuclear weapons is not Iran, because Iran has no nuclear weapons. Whatever the concerns are, and I also do have my own concern vis-a-vis Iran, but the only country is Israel. And with that, it destabilizes the order in the Middle East. So those are the things one should have in mind. And also one should have in mind that in the months to come, I was going to say international community, but you're right, Professor, stop it. Those within the international communities who are willing to contribute to peace and security, those positive forces, we would see a very difficult dancing. Dancing not necessarily beautiful, but maybe ugly would go, because on the one hand, there is a strong group of nations who call for increasing of pressure on Iran, because they do believe, for this or that reason, that at some point Iran cracks under the pressure and would bow and would follow the orders by those who press him in the nuclear field, and it would not only in the nuclear field. That's right, and would come, as they sit back, to the group which which Iran definitely does not belong currently. They would put more pressure on Iran, because they believe that the bombings and stuff, whatever they agree, disagree, that it's not enough. They believe that Iran works clandestinely on nuclear program, and that Russia backs Iran. Even Linus now mentioned some of the laser-related things, just recent discussion. I'm sure there will be more accusations of Russia, and closer to the NPT review conference and other events, that discourse would increase. And it remains to be seen how Iran would behave, because, as I said, there would be different moves. And there may be another move. Yes, Iran may bow, but there is a different scenario also on the table, that Iran will finally shut the and say enough is enough, and no IAEA inspectors, no replica of Cairo agreements because they collapsed. and just NPT goodbye. Now we are free, as the PRK did, to do whatever we can. It's our alienable right. In my view, that scenario would not be positive for the global stability, would not be in interest of my country, Russia, because I'm here thinking about interests of my country and not some hypothetical interests. But it's more and more difficult to prevent it, because although Russia has a very strong dialogue with Iran, including its informal element, now, after the attacks, nuclear weapon state was attacked by two nuclear weapon states, one de jure and the second de facto. Member of the NPT is attacked, not defended in that sense. It is really harder and harder for Russian diplomacy to find arguments to persuade Iran to behave accurately. But I still think that Russian diplomacy has a lot of creative ideas to try to explain to Iran that withdrawing from the NPT, doing some steps towards the nuclear weapons would be not in the interests of Iran itself. Again, it will be an interesting game here, and I thank Linus in Berlin and all of us here in this, and our online participants from different various places for participation. This is only now to announce that our next brainstorming session, our next научная среда, will be again in четверг, on Thursday, exactly in a week from now, December 4th. And we will have it in Russian. And I will, as this seminar is in English, I will continue in English. We will have two presenters. This time our students from this MA program, Yuri Shakov and German Silavin, and they will provide their findings on two issues, on two cases. Yuri on Australia, from an ally to an independent, towards an independent player, prospects for nuclear independence of Australia within AUKUS. And for Herman, it will be the military nuclear program of the Federal Republic of Germany, history, potential for restoration, and assessment of threats in the context of global nuclear non-proliferation regime. I'm translating because the topics are in the Russian language. And on this, I would ask Anastasia Nikulina to moderate and to be a moderator. And on December 11th, we will have Kirill Prokhorov as a recipient of the Trubnikov Award, Trubnikov grant, and the final brainstorming session of this year. He will speak about question mark arms race in outer space from history towards the current day, and I would ask Dasha Morozova to moderate. There would be no analytic, nobody to invited to write analytical reports, because you yourself, at least these three people, write for themselves. So the role of moderator is important to sum up and also to finish our own race with our brainstorming sessions for this calendar year and for this semester. Thank you all. Thank you, Linus, again. And the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Thank you to the organizers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if anyone wants to reach out, my email is on the last slide. Maybe the organizers can send out the presentation, and anyone is happy to, welcome to email me or connect on LinkedIn or anything like that.
Thank you, Linus, for that. Thanks.
Good seeing you. Bye-bye.
Большое.